The afternoon sun burned down as Ruth Collins, age 67, watched the car her son drove disappear around the corner. Her heart tightened, hurt, disbelief, and exhaustion twisting together. She whispered, "I'm not helpless, William. I can still think for myself." But he had insisted she needed a senior living home. She wanted independence, not a place that felt like a locked cage. Now she stood alone at a bus stop, stranded without her purse or bus pass. Slowly, Ruth lowered herself onto the bench, humiliation rising as she realized her own son had abandoned her to teach her a lesson. Ruth checked her nearly dead phone, the battery icon flashing like a warning. 3%. Perfect, she muttered. Her apartment was 4 miles away, her hip already aching at the thought of walking. She considered asking a stranger for help, swallowing the pride she had carefully held onto. "How could William think this is love?" she whispered. Lost in worry, she didn't notice someone sit beside her until a calm, cultured voice spoke. "Pardon me. I couldn't help hearing a bit of your trouble." She turned to see an older man in a neat gray suit, dark glasses covering his eyes. "I'm fine, really," Ruth said quickly, embarrassment warming her cheeks. The man smiled gently, as though he could see her clearly. "My hearing is good," he said. "Your son leaving you here was unkind." Ruth sighed heavily. "Cruel is more accurate." The man tilted his head. "Pretend you're my wife," he whispered suddenly. "My driver is coming. Your son will regret this." Ruth blinked. "What? I can't do that." He extended his hand with perfect accuracy. "My name is Arthur Wells. And you are?" She hesitated, then answered, "Ruth Collins." Arthur nodded. "Allow me to give you a dignified escape." Before Ruth could answer, a sleek black car pulled up smoothly. A well-dressed driver stepped out. "Right on time, Mr. Wells," he said with respect. Arthur stood, cane in hand, steady and confident. "We'll be taking Mrs. Collins home today." The driver nodded politely. Ruth froze for a moment, her phone finally dying with a soft beep. She thought of the long walk home, the empty apartment, and William's angry voice echoing in her mind. Slowly, she accepted the driver's help into the cool, leather-scented car. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she was making a mistake or being saved. "Where do you live, Mrs. Collins?" Arthur asked kindly as the car pulled away from the curb. Ruth gave her modest address, expecting to be dropped off quickly. But Arthur cleared his throat. "Actually, may I offer you tea first? My home is nearby. You may need a moment to breathe." Ruth opened her mouth to refuse, then thought about the silence waiting at home. "Tea would be nice," she said softly. As the car drove into more beautiful neighborhoods, Ruth studied Arthur. His calm presence, his neat silver hair, and the quiet confidence he carried, blind or not. As the car continued rolling through the quiet streets, Ruth tried to calm the mixture of anxiety and strange comfort rising inside her. Arthur sensed her tension. "You're wondering if accepting help was wise," he said gently. Ruth gave a small laugh. "Is it that obvious?" Arthur nodded. "I've lived long enough to recognize fear disguised as politeness." Ruth looked out the window at the large homes passing by. "My son thinks I can't manage anything alone." Arthur's voice softened. "Needing assistance doesn't make you helpless, Ruth. Everyone needs help sometimes. Even me." His calm tone eased something inside her. When the car turned into an elegant gated driveway, Ruth gasped softly. The property stretched wide with trimmed hedges, stone paths, and a tall colonial-style home glowing in the late afternoon light. "This is your house," she whispered. Arthur smiled. "I suppose it is. A bit large for one man, I admit." The driver parked and stepped out to open their door. Ruth hesitated, unsure if she belonged in a place like this. Arthur extended his hand. "Just tea, Ruth. Nothing more." She took his hand cautiously, stepping out into a world that felt too beautiful for how her day had begun. Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. High ceilings, polished floors, and a grand staircase greeted her like a scene from a classic film. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting the room in warm gold. "My daughter says the house is too big," Arthur joked softly. "But I prefer familiar spaces, even without sight." Ruth studied him, noticing how confidently he moved. "It doesn't look adapted for someone blind," she said gently. Arthur smiled. "I've memorized everything. 15 years teaches a man many tricks." The driver appeared again. "Tea in the garden room, sir?" Arthur nodded. "Perfect timing, James." Arthur offered Ruth his arm. "Shall we?" Ruth hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his sleeve. Together they walked down a hallway filled with framed paintings and soft light. The garden room was bright and peaceful, filled with plants and wicker chairs arranged near tall windows overlooking a blooming garden. Ruth sat carefully, still feeling out of place. "This room always makes me feel less old," Arthur said with a soft chuckle as he settled beside her. Ruth smiled. "It's beautiful." He nodded. "Beauty can calm the heart. And today your heart seems heavy." Ruth looked down, her voice quiet. "It is." James returned with a delicate tea set, placing it gently on the table. Arthur poured the tea with surprising steadiness. "Tell me, Ruth," he said calmly. "What happened today?" Ruth held her cup tightly. "William wants me in a senior home. He planned everything without asking me. When I disagreed, he pulled over and said if I thought I was so independent, I should find my own way home." Arthur's brows lifted. "And he left you?" Ruth nodded, eyes stinging. "Yes. My own son left me at a bus stop like a burden." Arthur shook his head. "Then he has much to learn." Ruth stared into her teacup, ashamed of how deeply her son's words had cut her. "He thinks I can't live alone," she whispered. "He treats me like I'm already fading away." Arthur listened quietly, hands folded. "Children often forget their parents have lived entire lives before them," he said gently. "They see age as weakness, not wisdom." Ruth sighed. "I taught him to stand on his own 2 feet. I never imagined he'd use independence to push me aside." Arthur leaned slightly closer. "You deserve respect, Ruth, not control." His words were steady, offering comfort she hadn't expected. James stepped out, leaving them alone again. Ruth looked at the lush garden through the wide windows. "I downsized after my husband died," she murmured. "Frank and I had a lovely home, but it felt too big when it became just me." Arthur nodded. "Losing a lifelong companion changes the way silence feels." Ruth glanced at him. "You lost your sight 15 years ago, yes?" Arthur smiled faintly. "I did. And with it, I lost a certain way of being seen by the world." Ruth tipped her head. "You speak like you see more than most people." Arthur chuckled softly. "Perhaps I do in my own way." He shifted slightly, folding his cane beside him. "May I ask," he said softly, "why you refused the senior home so strongly?" Ruth let out a trembling breath. "Because it felt like giving up. Those places are quiet, controlled, predictable. I'm not ready to stop living. I still want choices. I still want my life to feel like mine." Arthur nodded slowly. "Ah, you fear the world shrinking around you." "Yes," she whispered. "Exactly." Arthur rested a hand on the armrest. Then William pushed the wrong button. "Independence isn't a luxury for you. It's your dignity." Silence settled between them, peaceful rather than tense. Ruth felt herself relaxing in the soft light of the garden room. "Thank you for listening," she said. "Most people think older women only want sympathy." Arthur tilted his head. "I don't offer sympathy, Ruth. I offer perspective." She smiled. "A rare gift." He reached carefully toward the teapot, refilling her cup. "You needed someone to witness your frustration without judgment. Today was cruel, yes, but not defining." Ruth nodded. "I didn't expect kindness at a bus stop." Arthur smiled warmly. "Kindness arrives in unexpected places." As they finished their tea, Ruth felt calmer than she had all day. Arthur stood slowly. Would you like a small walk through the East Garden? It helps clear the mind. Ruth hesitated, unsure if she should prolong the visit, but the peaceful atmosphere felt healing. A short walk would be nice, she admitted. Arthur offered his arm. Take your time. The garden won't run away. They stepped outside onto a stone path surrounded by blooming flowers. The fresh air filled Ruth's lungs. It's beautiful, she whispered. Arthur nodded. Beauty restores us. And today you needed restoring. They walked slowly along the path, the soft crunch of gravel under their feet. Ruth admired the bright tulips and carefully trimmed bushes. You must have a full staff to keep this place so perfect, she said. Arthur nodded. A small team. Dedicated and loyal. Ruth watched him navigate with surprising accuracy. You move confidently, she observed. Arthur smiled slightly. Years of practice. And trust in the ground beneath my feet. Ruth hesitated, then asked quietly. Do you ever get lonely here? Arthur paused. Sometimes. A large home can feel very empty without someone to share the quiet. Ruth felt a soft ache in her chest at his words. I understand empty, she whispered. After Frank passed, the silence in my home sounded too loud. Arthur nodded knowingly. Loss changes the shape of a room. They paused near a stone bench under a blooming magnolia tree. Would you like to sit? Arthur offered. Ruth nodded. As they settled, a gentle breeze stirred the petals around them. William thinks the senior home will make my life easier, Ruth murmured. But easy isn't living. Arthur turned his face toward her voice. Then you must teach him that truth. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to birds fluttering in the branches above. Arthur finally spoke. May I ask something bold? Ruth raised an eyebrow. Bold? He nodded. Yes. Why did you truly get out of the car today? Was it anger? Or fear of losing yourself? Ruth exhaled slowly. Both. I didn't want to be talked down to anymore. I didn't want my son deciding who I am. Arthur's voice softened. You chose yourself. Ruth looked down at her hands. I hope I did the right thing. Arthur replied gently. Choosing yourself is never wrong. James appeared at the garden entrance. Dinner will be ready in about an hour, sir. Shall I set a place for Mrs. Collins? Ruth blinked, startled. Arthur smiled warmly. Only if she wishes to stay. Ruth hesitated, unsure. I don't want to impose. Arthur shook his head. You're not imposing. Your company. Ruth felt unexpected warmth rising in her chest. Well, she said softly. A meal sounds nice. Arthur nodded approvingly. Then it's settled. James left to make arrangements, leaving them alone again. Ruth couldn't remember the last time someone invited her to stay simply because they enjoyed her presence. They continued their slow walk back toward the house. The warm glow from inside made the mansion look peaceful, almost inviting. William will worry, Ruth murmured suddenly, guilt blooming in her chest. Arthur tilted his head. And he should. Sometimes worry teaches understanding. Ruth sighed. He'll think I'm being dramatic. Arthur chuckled softly. Then perhaps it's time he sees that you're not fragile, only determined. Ruth smiled faintly. Determined? Yes, I suppose that fits. As they stepped inside, Arthur said gently. Tonight, let the world wait. You deserve one evening of peace. Ruth nodded, feeling the truth settle warmly inside her. Inside the warm dining room, Ruth felt a quiet comfort she hadn't expected. The table was set with elegant dishes and soft lighting, making everything feel calm. Arthur gestured toward a seat beside him. Please make yourself comfortable. Ruth sat carefully, still unsure how she had ended up in such a place after the chaos of her morning. This is too much for someone you just met, she said shyly. Arthur shook his head gently. Sometimes strangers see what loved ones overlook. Ruth paused, feeling the weight of those words. William sees me as a burden. Arthur replied softly. I see strength. James served roasted chicken, warm rolls, and vegetables arranged like art. Ruth took a small bite, surprised by how hungry she actually was. "This is delicious," she admitted. Arthur smiled. "Mrs. Chen is our longtime cook. She insists on feeding people well." Ruth chuckled softly. "I could get used to this." Arthur leaned slightly closer. "Then perhaps you should visit more often." Ruth flushed, unsure how to respond. "I don't want to be a problem, Arthur." He shook his head. "You're not. You're a reminder that my house hasn't been empty forever." His honesty warmed her in unexpected ways. After dinner, James brought out tea again, this time with lemon biscuits that melted softly on Ruth's tongue. Arthur rested his hands on the table. "Tell me more about your son," he encouraged. Ruth sighed deeply. "William was always bright, hardworking, but after Frank died he changed. He became more protective, almost controlling." Arthur nodded. "Grief affects children differently." Ruth stared at her teacup. "He thinks he's helping by forcing me into a home. He doesn't see he's taking the life I still want." Arthur replied quietly. "Then maybe he needs to witness who you still are." Ruth leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and relief mixing inside her. "Do you have children?" she asked. Arthur nodded slowly. "A daughter. Her name is Grace. She worries too much as well." Ruth smiled sadly. "Maybe all adult children do." Arthur sighed. "Grace would wrap my life in bubble wrap if I let her." Ruth laughed softly. "William already tried that today." Arthur's voice shifted with gentle seriousness. "Children forget that their parents have lived entire lives long before them." Ruth nodded slowly. "Yes, they forget we have stories of our own," Arthur replied. "Then let this be part of yours." Later, as James walked her toward the car for the ride home, Ruth glanced back at Arthur, who waited near the doorway with a gentle expression. "Thank you for everything today," she said. Arthur bowed his head slightly. "Thank you for trusting me." Ruth hesitated, then added softly, "I haven't felt valued like this in a long time." Arthur's smile deepened. "Value is something you never lost, Ruth. Some people just stopped noticing it." Ruth felt her throat tighten. As the car door opened for her, she gave Arthur one last look. "Good night," he replied warmly. "Until tomorrow, Mrs. Collins." The car ride back to Ruth's apartment was quiet, the faint hum of the engine soothing her tired nerves. She leaned back, replaying the afternoon in her mind. It felt surreal, being abandoned at a bus stop, rescued by a stranger, and then welcomed into a mansion filled with warmth. When James pulled up to her building, she hesitated before getting out. "Thank you," she said softly. James nodded. Mr. Wells was glad to help. Ruth stepped out, suddenly aware of how small her life felt compared to Arthur's world. Yet strangely, she didn't feel overwhelmed, she felt seen. As Ruth entered her apartment, the familiar silence pressed against her. She set her keys down, noticing how empty the space felt. "Frank," she whispered to her late husband, "you'd never believe the day I had." She made herself a small cup of tea, though it tasted dull compared to Mrs. Chen's. Sitting on her couch, she stared at the clock. William hadn't called. Not a single message. "He doesn't even know if I'm safe," she murmured, bitterness touching her voice. She opened her phone to call him but stopped. Tonight, she decided, the apology needed to come from him. Just as she set her phone down, it buzzed. A text from an unknown number flashed. "I hope you arrived safely. Rest well, Ruth. Tomorrow is a new day." Ruth felt a flutter in her chest, an emotion she hadn't felt in years. Someone had thought of her. Someone had cared. She typed back carefully. "Thank you, Arthur. Today meant more than I can say." She hesitated, then added, "Good night." After sending the message, Ruth sat back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't romance, at least not yet. It was gratitude. It was recognition. It was the beginning of something. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Ruth's curtains, waking her gently. She stretched, her joints reminding her she wasn't young anymore. Still, she felt lighter than she had in months. As she dressed, she wondered if Arthur's invitation for tomorrow had been serious or simply polite. Before she could overthink it, her phone rang. William's name flashed on the screen. Her heart tightened. "Mom," William said nervously when she answered. I'm sorry about yesterday." Ruth closed her eyes. "William, leaving me like that was unacceptable." He sighed. "I know. I panicked." Ruth replied softly. "We need to talk. But not now." After ending the call, Ruth sat quietly, surprised at her own calmness. Before she could settle her thoughts, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Arthur. "James can collect you at noon. Only if you'd like company today." Ruth felt her lips curve into a small smile. She typed back, "I'd like that." When the black car arrived on time, Ruth stepped outside feeling strangely confident. As James opened the door for her, she said, "Good morning." He nodded respectfully. "Mr. Wells is looking forward to seeing you." Ruth settled into the seat, unsure what the day would bring, but ready for it. When Ruth arrived at Arthur's home, he waited near the doorway with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Ruth," he said gently. She felt her cheeks flush. "I wasn't sure if yesterday was real," she joked. Arthur chuckled. "I assure you it was." They walked to the garden room, sunlight washing over the space. "Did you sleep well?" Arthur asked. Ruth nodded. "Better than I expected." Arthur looked thoughtful. "I'm glad. You deserve rest after the day you endured." Ruth smiled softly. "Being here feels peaceful," Arthur replied. "Then let's spend the day reminding you that peace is still yours to claim." They spent the next hour strolling through the garden, Arthur matching Ruth's pace with surprising ease. "You navigate so well for someone who can't see," Ruth said lightly. Arthur paused, face unreadable. 15 years teaches habits," he replied. But something in his tone made Ruth tilt her head. Before she could ask further, Grace's voice echoed from the patio. "Dad, James said you were outside." Grace approached quickly, her expression tight. "We need to talk." Arthur exhaled. "Grace, this is Ruth." Grace gave a polite but guarded nod. "Hello. May we speak privately, Dad?" Ruth sensed tension ripple in the air. Ruth stepped back, giving them space, but Grace hesitated. "Actually, Ruth should hear this too." Arthur frowned. "Grace." "Dad, the journalist contacted the foundation again," she said firmly. "He saw photos from yesterday. You were moving too confidently." Ruth blinked, confused. "Confidently?" Grace met her eyes. "My father is blind, Mrs. Collins. But lately he hasn't been acting blind." Ruth felt her heartbeat quicken. Arthur's jaw tightened. "Grace, that's enough." Grace turned to Ruth. "I don't know what's happening, but if you're involved, you deserve to know the truth." Ruth looked between them, stunned. "Arthur, what is she talking about?" Arthur stood very still, his hands clasped behind his back. "Ruth," he said quietly, "there is something I should have told you." Grace crossed her arms. "Something you should have told everyone." Arthur let out a soft, tired breath. "I am not completely blind," he admitted. "I lost part of my vision years ago, but not all. Pretending otherwise gave me privacy, control, space to breathe." Ruth stared at him, shocked. "You mean, you can see?" Arthur nodded slightly. "Somewhat. Enough." Ruth felt her chest tighten. "And you didn't tell me." Arthur's voice cracked. "I was afraid of losing the first honest connection I've had in years." Silence fell heavy between them. Ruth felt anger stirring, anger at being misled, but also pain that he hadn't trusted her. "Arthur, honesty is all I ever asked for," she whispered. He stepped toward her. "Ruth, I never meant to deceive you. I meant to protect what little peace I had left." Grace sighed deeply. "Dad built this lie so high he couldn't climb out." Ruth shook her head, trying to steady her breath. "Arthur, I let you into my story. I trusted the man who helped me when my own son hurt me. Arthur's face softened with regret. I know. And I'm sorry. Ruth turned away, needing air. She walked toward the fountain, her steps slow but steady. Arthur followed at a respectful distance. Ruth, please, he said quietly. Let me explain. She wiped her eyes before turning back to him. Explain why you performed blindness in front of me. Why you let me pour my heart out while you held a secret. Arthur swallowed hard. Because your honesty woke something in me. Something I didn't expect. Something I didn't want to lose. Grace placed a hand on her father's shoulder. Dad, she deserved the truth from the beginning. Arthur nodded painfully. She did. Ruth's voice trembled. I wasn't looking for a savior, Arthur. I was looking for someone who saw me. Arthur stepped closer, eyes full of guilt. I did see you, Ruth. More clearly than anyone in years. She looked down. And yet, you hid from me. He exhaled deeply. If you walk away now, I'll understand. But know this, meeting you changed me. You reminded me what connection feels like. Ruth closed her eyes, steadying herself. When she opened them, her voice softened. I don't want your performance. I want you, the truth, the real man, flaws and all. Arthur's shoulders relaxed with relief. Then you'll have nothing but the truth from now on, he said. Grace offered Ruth a small, genuine smile. He means that. My father rarely lets people into his life. You're the first person in years he's cared about enough to tell the truth. Ruth nodded slowly. Good. Because I've had enough lies this week. Arthur extended his hand. Not with perfect aim, not with rehearsed accuracy, but naturally, honestly. May I walk with you, Ruth? She hesitated before placing her hand in his. Yes, she said quietly. But no more secrets. Arthur whispered. No more. Later that afternoon, Arthur asked James to drive Ruth home. Instead of leaving immediately, he walked her to the car himself, without his cane, without the careful performance. Are we still all right? He asked softly. Ruth studied him. We're not perfect, she said. But perhaps we don't have to be. Arthur smiled, a real, unguarded smile. I'd like to earn a place in your life, Ruth. She nodded. Then start by calling me tonight. He chuckled. I can do that. As she settled into the car, Ruth felt something unexpected. Hope. Not the fragile kind. The steady kind. That evening, Ruth sat on her couch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Her phone buzzed. Arthur. I made tea. Not as good as Mrs. Chen's, but I tried. Ruth laughed gently. I'm proud of you. Another message came. May I see you tomorrow? Ruth typed slowly, smiling. Yes, tomorrow. Across town, Arthur stood in his quiet mansion, no cane, no dark glasses, just himself. And across her small apartment, Ruth felt a peace she hadn't felt in years. William had tried to control her life. Arthur had tried to hide his.